We are wisdom, because I really feel like I connect more to that higher wisdom.
Dolly Parton held a secret about Kenny Rogers for 30 years. It involved their biggest hit, stolen credit, and a promise she was forced to make. In the 1990s, when Kenny's career crumbled, Dolly could have helped him. Instead, she stayed silent. Their 2017 reunion looked perfect on stage, but backstage, Kenny finally confessed what he'd done in 1983. The betrayal was worse than anyone imagined. It explains why America's favorite duo barely spoke for years. What Kenny admitted will change how you hear their music forever. Dolly Parton came into the world on January 19, 1946, in a one-room cabin tucked into the hills of Locust Ridge, Tennessee. She was the fourth of 12 children born to Robert Lee Parton and Avie Lee Owens. They were so poor, her father paid the doctor for her birth with a sack of cornmeal. The cabin had no electricity, no plumbing, and no privacy. The kids slept 3 or 4 to a bed. Some of the younger ones would wet the bed at night, and Dolly often found herself in the middle of it, waking up cold, embarrassed, but used to it. Meals were whatever they could stretch, usually beans, maybe cornbread. Her father never learned to read or write, but he had a sharp mind for business. Her song, Coat of Many Colors, would later wrap all that struggle into a patchwork of pride and pain. When she was 6, she started singing at her grandfather's Pentecostal church. He was the pastor, and the hymns echoed through the wood walls like promises. By 8, her uncle Bill Owens gave her a cheap guitar, and that was it. She played until her fingers ached. At 10, she was already singing on the Cass Walker Show out of Knoxville. It didn't pay much, but it bought groceries and shoes. At 13, she recorded her first single, Puppy Love. Her uncle took her 30 hours by bus to Lake Charles, Louisiana, just for that one chance. The song didn't hit the charts, but she remembered the diesel fumes, the sweat, and the sting of rejection. That same year, she sang at the Grand Ole Opry and earned 3 encores. She was just a kid, but the crowd kept calling her back. Loss found her early. In 1955, her baby brother Larry died just 4 days after birth. The family didn't talk much about it, but it clung to them. Dolly carried that grief in her songs. She started writing music at 5 years old, even before she could read properly. Her first tune, Little Tiny Tassel Top, was scribbled on the back of church papers. By 7, she had rigged a broken mandolin into a 2-stringed guitar and kept strumming. Her mother's voice and the haunting mountain ballads shaped her sound. Songs about longing, poverty, and grit. These early cracks became the veins of gold in her later work. She didn't wait long after high school. In 1964, just a day after graduation, she packed a suitcase, grabbed her guitar, and rode to Nashville with Uncle Bill. They had no money for hotels. She slept in cars, crashed on couches, and wrote songs at Combine Publishing by day. Fuel to the Flame, one of her early hits, got picked up by Skeeter Davis in 1967. It made waves on the charts. Dolly later said she came to town with nothing but dreams and a suitcase full of songs. And it was true. She was writing 10 songs a week, grinding through rejection until the city noticed her voice. At 13, the same year as her Opry debut, she met Johnny Cash backstage. He listened to her sing and told her to trust her instincts. She held on to that advice like a secret weapon. When her 1963 single Dreaming failed, she nearly quit. But she remembered Cash's words. They kept her grounded. She returned to school for a while, but the fire never left. The Opry had clapped for her 3 times. That kind of moment doesn't let go. In 1964, outside a Nashville laundromat, she met Carl Thomas Dean. He wasn't in music. He didn't want the spotlight. They married in secret on May 30th, 1966, in Ringgold, Georgia. Only Dolly's mother, the preacher, and his wife were there. Her record label didn't want the marriage public. They thought it would ruin her image, so they kept it hidden for a year. Dean stayed out of the press for their entire marriage, which lasted nearly 60 years until his death in 2025 at age 82. People often thought Dolly was single, but she always said the relationship was real, just private. It had started beside a washing machine and lasted a lifetime. In 1965, Dolly signed with Monument Records at 19. Her debut album, Hello, I'm Dolly, came out in 1967. Dumb Blonde, one of the singles, hit number 24 on the Billboard Country chart and stayed there for 14 weeks. It was a bold song that made fun of the stereotype and shoved back at it. Most women in country music were told to act sweet and soft. Dolly leaned into wit and defiance. Monument saw her not just as a singer, but as a songwriter. It changed everything. By 1968, she and Uncle Bill had written more than 150 songs together. One of them, Put It Off Until Tomorrow, became a hit for Bill Phillips and won a BMI Song of the Year award. It hit number 8 on the country charts. That award proved she wasn't just a child prodigy. She was a writer with something real to say. Bill Owens helped her navigate the twisted lanes of the Nashville machine. He was her mentor, her lookout. That song's success brought money and stability. It also proved that a young woman from a cabin with no plumbing could write something America would sing back. But making it in Nashville wasn't clean. Dolly spoke out later about the sexual harassment she faced. Producers, managers, men with power dangling contracts in exchange for favors. She said humor helped her dodge most of it. She built a shell, toughened by years of poverty and rejection. In interviews, she described it as routine. It wasn't a surprise. It was expected. And she hated that. During the Me Too movement, she told those stories again, this time so younger women wouldn't feel alone. Her real breakout came in 1967 when she joined Porter Wagoner's TV show. He had heard her demo tape and offered her a spot as his duet partner. The show aired weekly and put Dolly in front of millions of eyes. But it came with strings. Wagoner tried to control her image. He didn't want flashy makeup or short dresses. He wanted her to fit a mold. His mold. As her popularity grew, so did the tension. She wanted creative control. He kept pulling the reins. They lasted until 1975, but by then, Dolly had outgrown the partnership. In 1973, she wrote Jolene. It was inspired by a real red-headed bank teller who had flirted with Carl Dean, and also by a young fan. The song took 10 minutes to write. It poured out of her. It was her first #1 hit. The pain, the vulnerability, the jealousy. It was real. It hit hard. Over 200 versions of Jolene have been recorded since. That raw emotion made it timeless. Then came 1974. Dolly wrote I Will Always Love You as a goodbye to Porter Wagoner. It was a breakup song, not for a lover, but for a business partner. He didn't want her to leave. He tried to stop her. She cried the whole night after writing it. The song topped the charts that year, and again in 1982. In 1992, Whitney Houston turned it into one of the biggest hits of all time. It made millions. But the core was still Dolly, trying to leave with grace. In 1968, she had moved to RCA Records. Her first song with them, Just Because I'm a Woman, took on cheating double standards. She had watched men get forgiven for infidelity while women were branded for life. The song was honest, and it struck a chord. It wasn't polite. It wasn't soft. It was real. That one track pushed her closer to the edge of superstardom. Wagoner didn't let go easily. In 1975, He sued her for $3 million, saying she broke their contract. Behind the scenes, people described him as controlling. He'd blocked performances and tried to force her to keep working with him. The lawsuit was settled, but the cracks were public. Dolly got her freedom, but the fight left scars. It became a symbol of what women in country music had to endure just to stand on their own. People whispered about an emotional affair between them. Nothing was confirmed, but the tension was there. Fights broke out on set. One time, Wagoner smashed a guitar in the studio. The jealousy, the control, the talent. It all clashed. They had made something beautiful together, but it came at a cost. In 1980, Dolly Parton stepped into the spotlight in a new way. She played Dora Lee Rhodes in the film 9 to 5, a blonde, sharp secretary constantly harassed by her sleazy boss, Frank Hart. It wasn't just a role. Jane Fonda, who co-starred and produced the movie, picked Dolly herself. Jane had felt the weight of Hollywood sexism, and she wanted a woman who understood what it meant to be overlooked, talked down to, and used. Dolly had lived that in Nashville's temp jobs before she ever got famous. The film pulled in over $103.9 million worldwide and gave a voice to working women fed up with being ignored. Her title song, which she wrote herself, didn't just top charts. It got an Academy Award nomination and earned her a Golden Globe nod. Behind the glitter was the real pain and truth millions of women carried. But just a few years later, in 1984, she collapsed on stage in Indianapolis, her body giving out under years of unspoken pain. Doctors found it was endometriosis, a condition affecting 1 in 10 women. Her pain hadn't been imagined. In 1985, she had a partial hysterectomy. It took away her ability to have children, and with it, something deeper broke inside her. She spiraled into a depression so deep, she thought about ending her life. But her dog, Popeye, sensed something was wrong, nudged her, and broke the moment. That tiny interruption pulled her back from the edge. She never forgot it. The smile she wore in public stayed on, but she carried a private grief that would never fully leave. It changed how she saw everything, including herself. In 1986, while she was still healing, Dolly opened Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. She put in $65 million to turn a rundown amusement park into something that could hire her neighbors and boost the community. Some called it selling out. They said she turned her Appalachian childhood into a brand. But the jobs were real. The scholarships she funded were real. By 2023, over 3 million people came every year. Still, not everyone believed it was for the right reasons. Dolly didn't flinch. She said lifting up her people was worth the critics. But behind the scenes, more wounds were opening. In 1982, she had starred in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas with Burt Reynolds. Their chemistry on screen wasn't just acting. Their connection turned into something more. An affair of the heart, she later called it. But the experience left her feeling trapped, used, and emotionally gutted. She compared it to being violated by fame itself. It came just as she was dealing with her surgery and the collapse of her own sense of self. She took a 2-year break from the spotlight, trying to put herself back together in private. In 2016, her book Coat of Many Colors revealed what fans had long suspected. There had been trauma. She hinted at molestation by a relative, but never named names. What she did share was enough. Her songs had always carried pain, and now people understood why. The lyrics weren't just poetic, they were survival. The song Coat of Many Colors was about more than being poor. It was about being made to feel small and broken. But instead of bitterness, she clung to forgiveness. That choice shaped her. It softened her anger, but didn't erase the pain. Also in 1986, her family went to court against her own mother, Avie. Most of Dolly's siblings believed Avie couldn't manage her finances anymore. She was 77 and spending wildly, but two of Dolly's younger siblings, twins Floyd and Frida, stood by their mother. They didn't want her put under anyone's control. The legal battle tore through the family for years, opening wounds that had been buried since childhood. It didn't end until Avie died in 2003, but the scars never quite faded. The world saw Dolly as unshakable, but inside her own family, the ground was always shifting. Far from Tennessee, Kenny Rogers had his own storm brewing. He was born August 21, 1938 in Houston, one of 8 kids crammed into a federal housing project. His father, a carpenter, barely earned $75 a week. Meals were peanut butter sandwiches. Clothes were handed down until they wore thin. His mother worked long nursing shifts, often gone until night. He was left to raise himself in the gaps between work and school. When he said on national TV in 1986 that he was the first Rogers to graduate high school, the audience went silent. He had done what no one in his family ever had. In 1949, at just 11 years old, he won a local talent show at the Texan Theater. The crowd cheered, and that moment set off a fire inside him. He got a job as a busboy at the Rice Hotel making $9 a week, then swept floors at a hat store just to stay afloat. He later joined a doo-wop group called the Scholars in high school, and their local hit, The Poor Little Doggy, gave him a taste of what could be. In 1957, his solo track, That Crazy Feeling, landed him on American Bandstand. He was still just a teenager, but his voice had started to stretch beyond the city limits. In 1960, he married John Rogers. He was 22. The marriage lasted 3 years. It fell apart under the weight of his touring, his ambition, and the time he could never give her. He admitted it later. They weren't right for each other. It wasn't hate, just absence. That was the beginning of a long pattern. By 1966, he joined the New Christy Minstrels, a polished folk group with a hit called Green, Green. It had reached number 14 on Billboard 3 years earlier, but Kenny felt trapped. He didn't want to play safe. He wanted something wild. So in 1967, he broke away with 3 bandmates and formed the First Edition. People said he was crazy for leaving something that worked, but Kenny wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to create. In 1968, they released Just Dropped In, a trippy psychedelic song that hit number 4. Kenny was experimenting with marijuana behind closed doors, and the song reflected that dreamlike haze. He never pushed the drug image publicly, afraid to alienate his conservative fans. But the late-night jam sessions and wild energy shaped a new version of him. By 1970, he had his own TV show called Rollin' on the River. It ran until 1972 and featured acts like The Carpenters. It looked smooth on screen, but off-camera, the band was fraying. Cocaine was everywhere. The pressure to perform, to keep smiling, to stay relevant, it wore them down. Kinvasi joined to help ease the load, but it wasn't enough. The show ended. The band started to unravel. Kenny didn't say much about the drugs, but insiders knew the truth. In 1969, Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town, stirred something else. It was a Vietnam vet's story, paralyzed and watching his wife slip away. The song hit number 6 on Billboard, but disability advocates protested. They said it fed into pity and shame. Kenny stood by the track, saying it was meant to reflect hard truths. The arguments followed him for years. His second marriage to Margot Anderson lasted from 1964 to 1976. They had adopted her daughter and tried to make it work. But his career kept pulling him away. Margot described loneliness, long silences, and waiting for someone who was never home. When it ended, Kenny poured that pain into his songs, but the wounds stayed real. During first edition tours, Kenny fell deep into gambling. He lost thousands in Las Vegas, sometimes blowing the band's money. It became a quiet problem they all tiptoed around. Years later, people would connect that addiction to his hit, The Gambler. But back then, it wasn't poetic. It was chaos. In 1976, he left the band. By 1977, Lucille had gone to #1 on the country charts and #5 on the pop charts. He was solo now, but not alone. His third wife, Marianne Gordon, had just entered his life. Their love and pain danced inside the music. The song sold over 2 million copies. His voice was telling stories people understood because they were true. Then came The Gambler in 1978. It topped the charts and made him a legend. But behind the calm wisdom of the lyrics, Kenny was losing over $100,000 a year at the poker table. Once, he pawned his own gold watch just to keep playing. He laughed about it later, but the addiction left real cracks. In 1983, he recorded We've Got Tonight with Sheena Easton. The duet hit #6. Rumors exploded about an affair. His marriage to Marianne was crumbling, and tabloids fed off the speculation. He never confirmed it, but the damage was done. The divorce followed. The gossip stayed. In 1991, Kenny Rogers Roasters launched. He partnered with John Y. Brown Jr., the former KFC boss. Their wood-fired chicken restaurants took off fast. 400 locations opened. But by 1998, they filed for bankruptcy. The expansion had gone too far, too fast. The joke even made it into Seinfeld. Kenny lost millions. He kept a good face, but it stung. He won 3 Grammys in his life, including Best Male Country Vocal for The Gambler in 1980. But in the 1990s, he chased youth in another way. He got plastic surgery, eyelid lifts. The results made him look permanently shocked. In 2002, he said he looked surprised all the time and regretted the choice. Vanity had backfired. In 1992, things got darker. He sued his ex-wife Marianne for $6 million. She had leaked phone sex tapes, revealing private calls that shook his image. The court case was ugly. The damage to his reputation was worse. It ended quietly, but not cleanly. The pain of that scandal never fully disappeared. It started like magic, but almost fell apart. In 1983, Islands in the Stream climbed to #1 on both the country and pop charts, a rare crossover hit. But while the voices of Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton melted together perfectly on the radio, the studio sessions were a battlefield. Barry Gibb had crafted a balanced duet, but Kenny wanted more solo lines. He didn't just ask, he pushed, rewrote parts, got loud. Barry later said things got so tense, the song nearly collapsed. Dolly, known for lifting every room, sat quiet and distant, watching egos clash while the label feared the whole thing might explode. What listeners heard was a compromise stitched together with tension. And even though both later said they were friends first, that heat never fully cooled behind the scenes. People whispered about a feud for years, and though they smiled for cameras, those whispers never stopped. In 1999, Kenny was 61 and trying to start over again. He launched Dreamcatcher Records, his own label, and released Buy Me a Rose. It was soft, heartfelt, full of meaning, and it went straight to #1 on the country chart. It looked like a comeback, but privately, Kenny was crumbling. His marriage to Wanda Miller, which had begun in 1997, was starting to fray. He said later that singing that song was a way to dodge the truth. The love in the lyrics didn't match what he was living. He wasn't ready to admit that even his 5th marriage might be slipping. It took years before the split became public in 2020, ending a 23-year relationship, but the cracks had been there all along. Long before that, On a massive 200-acre stretch of Georgia land, Kenny chased a different dream: Arabian horses. He had one of the top collections in the country, worth millions. They were his pride. Then, in 1995, fire ripped through the farm. It killed 20 horses. Some were champions. Some had names he'd raised like children. He was shattered. The insurance company refused to pay the full loss, and Kenny spent years in court trying to recover what he'd built. He never fully did. The ranch never returned to its former glory, and the fight drained him. Still, he talked about those horses with a kind of ache that never left. Then came 2013. Kenny was 75. He went in for heart surgery, triple bypass. What triggered it was something more than aging. He had diabetes, and it got so bad that doctors warned him he could lose a leg. A man who had spent decades on stage, walking tall, now faced amputation. He canceled shows. He stayed home. Quietly, he started talking about his past. He admitted he'd used cocaine back in the 1970s, said it almost ended his career and damaged his body in ways he could never undo. The weight of those choices caught up with him slowly, then all at once. In 2004, when Kenny was 66, he became a father again. His wife Wanda gave birth to twin boys, Justin and Jordan, through IVF. He adored them, but happiness at home didn't mean peace everywhere. In 2012, Christopher, his son from a previous marriage, sued him over the trust fund. Christopher said the twins were being favored. The case turned ugly, and though it never went to a public resolution, the bitterness spilled out. Kenny's family life, already complicated, cracked further. The spotlight never stopped shining, even in the private corners. Then came the memoir. In 2012, Kenny published Luck or Something Like It, and told the truth many fans weren't ready to hear. He'd had affairs. One with a backup singer in the 1980s almost resulted in a child, and he paid hush money to avoid headlines. Others claimed he'd been involved with them, and he quietly paid them off too. He called fame his real mistress, said it destroyed parts of him he never fully got back, even admitted to using phone sex during lonely hotel nights on tour, paying to keep those stories quiet too. The gentle man with the beard and kind smile had been carrying a lot more than songs. Back in the early 80s, Kenny and Dolly had found something rare in each other. They came from nothing. He grew up in a Houston housing project, born in 1938. She came from a tiny cabin in Tennessee, one of 12 kids. When they met in Nashville, it was like they'd known each other forever. During the island sessions, they laughed, confided, leaned in. They never crossed the line into romance, and both were glad. Kenny said they flirted for 30 years on purpose, because they knew it would ruin everything if they didn't stop. Dolly once said it would have felt like incest. The love was real, but not that kind. In 1985, the CMA Awards left both their names off the winners list. Headlines screamed about jealousy and rifts, but it was nothing like that. Dolly had undergone a hysterectomy and was recovering. Kenny's knees were breaking down from decades of touring. They simply couldn't perform together. But the media fed the story that they had fallen out. They hadn't. They just needed time, and their bodies needed rest. Years later, they laughed about the whole thing, calling it gossip spun from nothing. The so-called silent years of the 1990s were quieter, but still noisy with rumor. Kenny was busy with Roasters, his chicken chain. Dolly joked about it once, and the press ran with it like she'd thrown a dagger. She hadn't. She was teasing like always. But the quote got twisted, and suddenly they were feuding again. Truth was, they were just overwhelmed with work and life. They drifted, not because of anger, but because that's what people do. The world wanted drama. They wanted peace. When Kenny died in 2020 at 81, Dolly cried on live TV. She said she had held back from doing one last song with him because she feared it would hurt his health. Kenny had told her before he died that he was sorry for pushing too hard in the studio, sorry for the pressure he'd put on her during the big hits. They had talked, cleared the air. She called their bond rare and said there was never a feud. Just two people trying to make something beautiful while the world looked on. People kept saying there were royalty fights, but they split everything 50-50. No drama, no secret lawsuits. Kenny even gave Dolly a custom guitar in 2012 just to say thanks. The truth was boring to tabloids, but beautiful to them. Fairness defined their working life, even when the rest of it felt chaotic. Their 2017 farewell concert was huge. Kenny wanted to end the night with The Gambler. Dolly wanted another song. Backstage, they had a moment, a sharp one. Then they laughed, hugged, and went on. That night at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, on October 25, 2017, they stood under the lights one last time. Tickets sold out fast, some reaching $299.50. The show pulled in over $20 million, and just like that, he retired. In 2021, a new album came out. It had unreleased songs recorded between 2008 and 2011, including a long-lost duet with Dolly called Tell Me That You Love Me. Fans were promised a hologram of her for live shows, but the costs shut it down. Still, the music stirred something deep in listeners. The album didn't need a hologram. It had their voices, still joined after all those years. Then came Dolly's cookbook in 2024. Good Lookin' Cookin' had stories of their shared meals. Her sister Rachel helped write it. In it, Dolly shared Kenny's favorite tortilla recipe. It was simple, just fried, with jalapeno and cheese. But it meant something. It was the kind of food you make when the world feels too loud, just like their music.